The control that stops the fraud can stop the honest payment in the same minute. When the Central Bank of Brazil suspended C&M Software's SPB connection, the abused path closed. Honest Pix traffic for every client institution on that pipe closed with it. Isolation sounds clean in a playbook. Isolation on a shared pipe is a blackout you scheduled the day you approved the grant, because the grant and the honest path were the same object. Why cutting the vendor also cuts you? Because revoke is one-to-many. The same pipe that lets you halt fraud also halts honest traffic. Third-party risk management, TPRM, is still guessing at the cost of the grant when it can name a revoke and cannot name the outage that revoke creates. A review that only asks how fast the vendor can be isolated will miss the review that should have asked what honest work dies in that same minute. Name the salary, the supplier payment, the refund, and the grocery transfer that were waiting on the same handle. A shared provider concentrates trust. Many client institutions grant one firm the right to speak, to connect, or to operate a pipe they do not want to run themselves. That concentration is how a sector gets capacity without each firm building a rail. The efficiency is real. The geometry is also real. One grant sits in front of many books. One emergency decision sits in front of many honest queues. Concentration is not a brand preference. Concentration is a single object that many businesses already need in order to work. Shared pipes exist because authorization, operations, and certificates are expensive to hold alone. A PSTI, a payment service technology provider, exists so a smaller institution can reach SBI and SBB without standing up the whole fabric. The written contract names the provider as a helper. The architecture names the provider as a choke point. Helpers that are also choke points are why a medium vendor can halt a set of institutions that never shared a board. Efficiency and blast radius are the same drawing seen on two calendars. The picture is the suspension, not the whole theft. C&M Software, a central bank authorized PSTI, was compromised on June 30th, 2025, and protocol-correct PIX orders moved reserve money. The Central Bank of Brazil then suspended C&M Software's SPB connection. That decision did the job a revoke is supposed to do. It also halted honest PIX traffic for every client still on that pipe. The fraud path and the grocery path were not two paths. They were one connection with two kinds of traffic. Emergency revoke is a blunt instrument because it cuts the grant, not the intent. The rail cannot keep the honest orders and drop only the stolen ones once the speaker itself is untrusted. If the certificate store, the session, or the connection is shared, revoke has one handle. Pulling that handle closes the abused message and the salary, the supplier payment, and the refund that were waiting on the same handle. Blunt is not a moral failure. Blunt is what a shared object does when you must turn it off. One-to-many revoke is the geometry of one provider, many clients, and many honest queues. A security team that thinks in singletons will write a playbook that says isolate the vendor. A sector that shares a pipe will experience that playbook as a blackout. The number of invoices is not the number of independent paths. 3 institutions on one SPB connection are one revoke away from 3 outages. Geometry outranks the size of the purchase order. Containment has a bill. The bill is the honest work that stops while the grant is dark. Hours of PIX downtime for every client on the pipe are not a surprise you discover later. They are the price of a grant that had no second path. A board that celebrates a fast cut and then asks why customers could not pay is asking 2 questions that were always one question. The cut worked. The business also stopped. TPRM that scores only the speed of isolation will file a success on the morning the floor cannot take a payment. The grocery path died when SPB was pulled. A written contract that names a helper does not move that dark hour off your books. Supervisors will ask why the only path was shared. Customers will ask why the grocery payment failed. Those questions land on the institution that granted the pipe, not on the playbook that said isolate the vendor. The review should ask a sentence most questionnaires never print. Can we cut this grant without cutting the business? If the answer is no, the grant is also an availability dependency, and it must be tiered that way. Solvency, a SOC 2 report, and assigned policy can all be true on the morning the only pipe goes dark. The question is not whether revoke exists on paper. The question is what honest work dies in the same minute, and whether anyone rehearsed that minute. A second path is the only thing that turns a shared revoke into a contained revoke. A second path is another licensed pipe, another certificate set, or another provider that has already carried a real payment for the same critical flow. A drawing that says dual vendor is not a second path. A purchase order that has never settled a PIX order is not a second path. If the rehearsal has never moved money, the path is still a hope. Hope is not a continuity control. Rehearse the cut on a quiet day and measure which honest cues die before the emergency makes the measurement for you. Revoke-without-blackout is a design, not a slogan. It means a grant you can take back for one client without silencing the others. It means certificates and API credentials that are scoped per institution, per purpose, and held in identity and access management so they can be killed one at a time. It means the second path is already warm. If the only kill switch is the provider's whole SPB connection, you do not have revoke without blackout. You have a shared fuse. If that design is too expensive, say so. Accept the outage as the cost of the grant. Write the outage into the continuity plan, the written contract, and the customer notice. Fund the hours. Name the owner. A grant that is cheap because it is shared is not cheap if the revoke is a sector event. Honesty here is a control. Pretending the cut will be surgical when the pipe is shared is how a Tuesday becomes a blackout you already chose and refused to write down. Those asks sit on one table. Concentration says how many books sit behind one grant. Bluntness says whether revoke can select intent or only the pipe. Second path says whether honest traffic has somewhere else to go. Bill says what the business will lose in the hour the grant is dark. TPRM that only scores the speed of the cut will celebrate the outage it just created. A review that can see this class of harm asks for evidence, not adjectives. Evidence is a diagram of who shares the pipe. Evidence is a revoke drill that names which honest cues die. Evidence is a tested second path, or a written acceptance that there is none. Evidence is a written contract that treats a provider cut as a continuity event, with notice and recovery duties. Trust is welcome. Trust is not a second path. Shared providers concentrate trust. Emergency revoke is blunt because it cuts the grant, not the intent. The C&M software SPB suspension is the picture. The abused path closed, and honest PIX closed with it. Ask whether you can cut the grant without cutting the business. Build revoke without blackout, or write the blackout down as the price. The grocery path died when SPB was pulled. Thank you.